Okay, last time we looked at, we were talking about classical economics. Today we're going to talk about what happens to bring in something called Keynesian economics and how the Great Depression causes this. Now remember, classical economics was pretty much, if the economy's going bad, don't do anything, it'll fix itself. If aggregate demand goes down, that pretty much means everything's on sale, things are cheaper, and that means that people will eventually start buying more, that'll bring demand back up, and the economy will fix itself. Now we're going to look at what happens during the Great Depression, the role of government, and again, Keynesian economics. So, starting off, basically, the Great Depression kind of destroys what we think of with classical economics for time being. And the reason I would give is because of debt and people spending money that they don't have. This would cause the Black Tuesday, which would be the great stock market crash of 1929. So basically, if we look at what happened was during the Great Depression was there was a huge amount of unemployment. 25% of the country was unemployed. We had, if we look here, in 1929, the stock market was going up, going up, going up, and then it goes down, way down here. And then for years is not able to fix itself. So it's not able to fix itself. Some kind of intervention is needed. So what causes this crash? The biggest thing that most historians say causes the crash is that people were buying stock on something called margin. They're buying stock on margin, which basically means they were buying stock on credit. So let's say you want to invest in a big company. Today that company might be like a Nike or something, but let's say you want to invest in any big company. If you want to buy stock, you can do that. You can go online and you can buy stock today and you own a share or part of that company. And part of that company is yours. So if I buy $40 worth of Nike stock today, I own a little bit of the company and it's public. The stock market is the collection of our public companies, and anyone can buy shares in them or sell shares in them. And we say they have certain value. Now, why would I want to buy some of Nike? Well, because I think if I buy a little bit of Nike, I think Nike's a company that's been around for a while, maybe it's going to make more money in the future, and my share might go up. Think about like Google 15 years ago, or Nike in 1980. If I would have invested a bunch of money in Nike in 1980 or Google 15 years ago, I could probably retire today because I'd probably make a lot of money off it. A $10 stock share of Google 15 years ago, if it was even public back then, $15 would probably be worth, $10, $15 would probably be worth like 50, 60, 70 bucks a share today. So if I had bought, let's say, 1,000 shares, I would be making, $30, $40, $50,000 off that. So anyway, this is the stock market. So people are buying into companies. But margin, I mentioned that word margin, which basically means credit. That means they weren't actually buying the whole stock. They were like making payments on the stock. So they'd buy like 10% of the stock and say, okay, I'll pay you back the rest later. Times were good in the 1920s. You guys were the Great Gatsby. It seemed like times were good. It was the Roaring 20s. It seemed like things were going to go good forever. But then what happened is people started, calling out the stocks, and they started seeing that, the market went down a little bit. And what happened was people panicked, and they started to try to sell their stocks. And when they tried to sell their stocks, they couldn't collect the money on it because people owed money on it. And this led to a vicious cycle, which met on Black Tuesday, which brought the stock market all the way down to its market low down here. Nearly zero, nearly destroying the whole stock market. Now, that was horrible. The credit crisis of having stock bought on margin basically caused this. And we can go further in detail on this. You can read more about it if you want to. But that's the real basic summary. So then, what happens is a classical economist would say, well, now everything's really, really, really cheap, so the economy should come back because business owners should probably start investing. People will start buying because things are cheap. Well, the problem was people couldn't buy because people who were buying stock on margin had now lost their jobs. Many people had lost their jobs. Many companies went down. So no one had money to hire anyone. And this led to a vicious cycle, which basically meant that instead of being able just to be a little short-term correction, which can easily happen, most cases with classical economics, this was a big, huge deal. And people didn't see this big credit crisis with stock and margin happening. So it went on for years and years. And Roosevelt was more of a believer in classical economics beforehand, and he basically He basically, was following most of thinking that the market will correct itself, maybe they can do some small things to help. But then he met someone named John Milton Keynes who came in and had a radical approach to this problem. We have a video, it's linked down here, right up here you can see, and you can go to the PowerPoint on the website, you can watch that, about Keynesian economics. But John Milton Keynes came in and he had a very interventionist approach. What he said was, you need to do something to fix this market, and the government needs to be more involved. So basically what John Milton Keynes was saying was that in time periods where the aggregate demand goes down, we have a slow turn in the economy, aggregate demand goes down, the government should get involved and should increase aggregate demand. So on my aggregate demand, if it goes down, what the government should do is they should increase aggregate demand. Now, how could the government increase aggregate demand? Well, what they could do is, the main things he said, is that they should take taxes and they should lower taxes so people will have more money to spend. So people have more money to spend, they'll buy more things, thus increasing aggregate demand. Along with lowering taxes, he also said that they should have increased government spending. So increase government spending should also happen at this time. So that means there should be more government projects, more government roads should be built, more government programs should happen. In the 1930s, the Great Depression, they started building a lot of parks, national parks. Almost all the city parks in Minneapolis were built during this time period. And this would get people working, which would put money in their pockets, and they could spend more, thus increasing aggregate demand. And this was his way, basically, on how to get out of the Great Depression. Now, continue on Keynesian economics. A lot of people like to do the part where the economy is going bad, where they lower taxes and increase government spending. Politicians can see that one. They'll get some gain on it. Most of their people like it. It's good in the short term. However, John Milton Keynes also advocated something else that's not so popular. He said during good times, when the economy comes back and maybe even goes above with aggregate demand, what then should happen is that the government should raise taxes, and along with raising taxes, they should also decrease government spending. So he also said that they should raise taxes and decrease government spending during good times. Now, politicians like the idea of lowering taxes and increasing government spending. People get things, they don't have to pay much, that's popular. But the other one in the good economy of raising taxes and decrease government spending is hardly ever popular and people don't want to do it. So one problem we can see with Keynesian economics is that if during bad times you lower taxes and you increase government spending, what happens to the deficit, the debt? The debt goes up. And you're supposed to repay that debt back in good times. Now this makes a lot of sense if you're thinking logically about this over a long-term period, but election to election, voters and politicians don't always think logically. So often what has happened since this time is that we've loved the Keynesian approaches of, lowering taxes, increasing government spending, but we don't want to do the other things during good times of raising taxes and decreasing government spending. Well, let's look at a few programs during the Great Depression. So I would say John Milton Keynes is a person who was necessary for the Great Depression. Some people, if you're really a big believer in Milton Friedman, you probably disagree with me, but I think during the Great Depression he was necessary. So, New Deal programs started like the Civilian Conservation Corps. What this did was this put young people to work, especially young men. If you're living in a society and there are a lot of unemployed people, especially a lot of unemployed men, 25% of the population was unemployed, 1930s. This was in the past. Most women were stay-at-home moms at this time, and most of the men were dependent upon their salaries for work. But if you have 25% unemployed, money's not coming. And also having a large group of young men not working, I would say it's just not a good thing. It's dangerous. Bad things can happen. So the program, one that Roosevelt designed, is the Civilian Conservation Corps. This is where people went out, basically they took groups of young men and they had them build parks. If you go up north near Duluth, along the North Shore near Lake Superior, there's a whole bunch of parks that were built during the Civilian Conservation Corps. Same with our parks around the Minneapolis area. So you got people working. Yes, they were building some stuff that was necessary. Some of the stuff wasn't even that necessary, but the goal was get people working, get money in their pockets. The other thing that you can't really measure using just aggregate demand or GDP is the increase in skills that these young men will be developing by doing these jobs. One problem we're seeing today after the recession of 2008 is that we've had a lot of people been unemployed for 4, 5, 6 years, and they haven't been able to develop skills, so you kind of stay unemployed. You don't have skills, and it's harder to get a job. So the Civilian Conservation Corps addressed this by hiring a bunch of young people, young men, to work jobs and keep skills going, and this went through the 1930s. Another program that was introduced to increase aggregate demand was Social Security. Now, Social Security was and is a program that most people would say has been successful. Some people have problems with it today. We can see a problem having it in the future, but most people would say it's been a fairly successful program. Now, the Social Security Act was signed into law by President Roosevelt in 1935. Now, basically what this did was it created an insurance program designed to pay retired workers at the age of 65 for the retirement. Also, after a while, it started to include people who, just couldn't quite, make it for themselves. Like, an example is I have my godson who has Down syndrome, and my brother and sister-in-law do get some money, Social Security money that goes to him because he has health issues that they just quite can't pay for. So Social Security helps pay for that. Now, when Social Security Act was passed, the most pressing problems were double-digit unemployment and poverty. Now, what happened was a lot of older people had lost their money, and if we look back when 1935, when it was implemented, the number of old people who were in poverty was astronomical. So to try to help people who are in poverty, what they decided was, we'll take taxes of all our wage earners, Social Security taxes, and we'll use that money to help create some form of pension for the old people who are retired. So if we look at this, back when Social Security was first started, we had about 7 wage earners for a retired person. In 1960s, even 5.1. So 5.1 workers, you take money of their paycheck, and it would go to someone who's retired. You can see we are going to face a problem with Social Security is that we have an aging population, and many more people are going to need Social Security, but we don't quite have the workers for it. But without Social Security, even today without Social Security, the number of poor people who would go below the poverty line is 16 million. So we see that today many people are dependent upon Social Security, and I would say especially for retired people today, they've paid into it their whole life. So if you take someone like my father, who was born in 1947, so was my mom. Now, my father just retired, and he's been working since he's been about 15 years old. He's been paying into Social Security his whole life. He should be able to collect it. Now, he's depending upon us working for him to get his retirement money. Now, one of the big problems was if someone like my dad's age was born in 1947. Well, 1945 was a very interesting year in America because 1945 was the year that World War II ended. So here's one problem we have for the future. 1945 ends. The soldiers come back from World War II. What happens 9 months later? There's the baby boom. All these babies are born between about 1945 and 1955. Those people are retiring right now, and they are owed Social Security. But there's a lot of them, and we have to be able to pay for them, so how do we solve this problem? This is a big problem. People don't know if Social Security is going to be able to make it in the future. I have my own personal solution to the problem. Some people like it, some people don't. I actually think we should increase immigration in this country and tax new immigrants under Social Security, and that would allow us to pay for our retirees because we need a larger working age population, which we just don't have right now because people are tending not to have many kids. So these were 2 New Deal programs. I kind of got off there a little bit, but these are 2 New Deal programs which were designed to increase aggregate demand. It was government intervention, and this came with government money.